Many technology booms have early periods in which innovators have a first mover advantage, and a lot of what happens in their industry is informed by the decisions those innovators make. After that, depending on the technology, but this is common enough to be considered a trend, after that, there tends to be a period of build-out and consolidation amongst the people and business entities that survived that initial innovation-focused throwdown. In the context of personal computers, this moment saw computer makers like Microsoft and Apple scramble to pivot from figuring out what an operating system should look like and whether or not to use mice to navigate user interfaces to a period in which they were rushing to scale up the manufacture of now essential but previously comparably rare components. Suitable screens for their monitors, chips that could power their increasingly graphical machines, and the magnetic materials necessary to produce floppy disks and spindle-based hard drives, for instance. There's an initial period in which new ideas and approaches provide these entities with a moat that protects them against competition, in other words, but then the game they are playing changes. The rules are more fully understood and to some degree locked into place and agreed upon by those still playing, and instead of competing for the biggest, most brazen new ideas, they lock onto one set of ideas that seem to be the best of what's available at that moment, and then they build on those, iterating them at a regular cadence, but focusing especially on scaling. So at this second stage, they are investing in the ability to outproduce their competition in some way, so they can eventually bypass that competition and, they hope, safely increase their prices and make a profit, as opposed to just larger and larger revenues with equal or greater expenses attached to them, continuing to be reliant on investor injections of capital rather than generating their own surplus returns. By many analysts' and insiders' estimates, we have just entered that second stage in the generative AI industry. That's the sort of artificial intelligence that generates text and images and code and everything else, it seems like, and it's increasingly becoming a sort of commodity rather than a new, flashy, hot thing that very few companies can offer to the market. What I'd like to talk about today are the increasingly massive financial figures associated with this industry's shift to that second stage of development, and why some of those insiders and analysts are voicing fresh concerns that this could all lead to a bubble if we're not careful, and possibly an historically large one. You're listening to Let's Know Things. I'm Colin Wright. I'm able to keep this show ad-free because of support from listeners like you. If you're finding value in what I'm doing here, consider becoming a paid supporter for the cost of a cup of coffee each month at letsknowthings.com. And as a thank you for your helping me keep this show solvent, you'll receive an additional bonus More Things episode each month. All right, let's get back to the show. There are many possible ways we can measure the growth of the AI industry over the years. The US market size, for instance, the US being one of the largest markets, if not the largest, depending on how you measure things in this space right now. The US market size, which is a measure of the value of AI-oriented companies based on how much shares of their company cost or would cost on the open market, has ballooned from just over $100 billion in 2022 to an estimated $174 billion in 2025. That figure is expected to grow at a not quite 20% compound annual growth rate through 2034, which, if accurate, would put this market in the US alone at more than $850 billion. Another metric we might use is that of capital expenditure, or CapEx, in this corner of the tech industry, which refers to the amount of money AI companies are using to buy, upgrade, or maintain their long-term assets, things like new computer chips or the data centers that they fill with those chips. The 7 most valuable US tech companies, Meta, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Nvidia, and Broadcom, that last spot formerly held by Tesla, but that was dropped from the designation in late 2024 and replaced by Broadcom. Just those 7 companies have spent $102.5 billion on CapEx this last financial quarter. And most of that was from just 4 of them: Meta, Alphabet, Microsoft, and Amazon. The remainder only spending something like $6.7 billion, which is a lot of money, but not a lot compared to those other 4. That is a staggering amount of investment, and due to a recent drop in consumer demand, the money individual US citizens spend on things like food and clothes and smartphones and cars and all the other things people buy, that was low enough recently that US President Trump fired the person in charge of collecting the data because he accused that person of making it seem low to make him look bad. It has been that bad. And because of that drop, AI-related CapEx spending by these massive US tech companies has added more to GDP growth than consumer spending for the past 2 quarters. All the things all the people in the US bought over the past 2 quarters did not cost as much in aggregate as what these 7 companies spent during the same period on new and existing assets. That is pretty wild, and it is incredibly unusual. And it's the consequence, partly, of the shift in these companies' focus from providing goods and services that relied heavily on people, paying salary and giving stock compensation, which is not a CapEx expense because it's spent on employees. They have shifted from that to spending heavily on all that infrastructure that they believe will be required to help them compete with those other AI competitors that are all frantically investing gobs of money in the same. Whomever can build the biggest, baddest, most reliable, and powerful data centers and can get the AI-optimized chips to fill them with will have an advantage over their opponents in the new developing tech world paradigm, it is thought. So they are pumping gobs of resources into exactly those sorts of assets, hoping to get ahead, to build an insurmountable advantage, and to put their competition out of business, or failing that, to establish themselves as the AI Coca-Cola versus their opposition's AI Mr. Pibb. Similar dynamics are playing out elsewhere, especially in China, where the market could reach a valuation approximating today's US AI market valuation in 3 to 5 years, and several times that, up to $1.4 trillion by 2030. Though like all these figures, it depends on how we choose to measure these sorts of things, including what counts as an AI company. And in China, several of their major AI players are heavily involved in automation, especially robotics, which itself is expected to be a $5 trillion industry in just that country by 2050. Europe's market is comparably smaller, as is its overall tech industry, but the AI market is now just shy of 15% of its total tech sector, up from 12% in 2022. And AI startups are attracting about a quarter of all VC funding in the bloc right now. So it's outperforming the scale of the industry in terms of the amount of money that it draws in. So they are starting from a less spendy start, but like pretty much everywhere the necessary knowledge and manufacturing base exists at the moment, the European AI market is growing a lot faster than anyone would have expected even just 5 years ago. And there are real deal innovations coming out of this tech. These investments are flooding into AI companies because these technologies, this version of them, the generative AI stuff, has completely rewired the programming world. AI bots and agents helping coders achieve a lot more faster, and non-coders make things they would not have been able to build lacking these tools, imperfect as many of those vibe-coded tools are under the hood. We are also seeing an explosion of other sorts of generated content and the injection of these tools that make such content into Hollywood studios and consulting firms and government agencies and everything in between. And that is causing equal parts panic and excitement, depending on whether you're one of the people who feels like they might be laid off soon, replaced by software, or if you are someone who profits from all those layoffs and the payments from the companies that hope to save money by conducting them, replacing their comparably expensive employees with cheaper AI tools. Things have gotten so wild that Meta's CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, has started offering compensation packages ranging from $200 million to more than $1 billion to top AI talent. To individual people, $1 billion, that's their offered compensation package. Meta's AI spending is already massive and could hit $72 billion this year, but the company has said it could hit $100 billion in 2026. while Microsoft's leadership suggested their 2025 spending of $30 billion could balloon to $120 billion in 2026. OpenAI recently offered their employees large bonuses in the hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars range to counter these sorts of overtures from the likes of Meta. But there's a lot of money flying around from all directions, much of it aimed at more AI infrastructure or at the relatively few people on the planet who understand this technology well enough to make a competitive difference in this industry. And that is a lot of money. There's just so much spending happening, so many resources sloshing around in this one space right now. And all this investment is predicated on the idea that AI will change everything, that we are stepping into a new paradigm, and those who control the AI will basically own the next game. So they are all trying to set things up so that they win that next game, or at least have the best hand possible when it arrives, potentially in the very near future. There have been increasingly loud arguments made by longtime generative AI critics, but also, more recently, ardent AI boosters that we might be running up against a wall of what these things can do for us. This version of the AI concept, at least, generative AI. And these arguments got louder with OpenAI's release of their long-teased GPT-5 model, which some expected to be true AGI, artificial general intelligence, human-grade, flexible, omni-capable intelligence that could do anything a human can do, while others thought it might be a mono-focused superintelligence of some kind, like the perfect coder or the perfect image generator, something like that. What users got instead was not that. It seems to be better at some things, still not great at other things. This was an incredibly expensive model to produce. The training costs alone are estimated to be something like $500 million, and that is just a portion of the total cost of creating this sort of model, not to mention running it. And what OpenAI served up instead of something groundbreaking was a slightly better, though in some ways seemingly the same or even worse version of what everyone's been playing with for years now. There's room for disagreement on this, as while there are some more objective tests for measuring models' capabilities, a lot of it is circumstantial and depends, among other things, on what you're trying to do, how the systems are prompted, and so on. There's also something to be said for cost reductions and other sorts of benefits of new models beyond raw power and capability. But this thud of a launch for what was supposed to be a sea-changing system has led to the ringing of some alarm bells, industry watchers wondering if we might be careening toward a bubble, at a moment in which, again, this segment of the tech industry is contributing more to the US's GDP than all of consumer spending combined. A bubble, to be clear, would not mean the collapse of the US economy or even these companies necessarily. It would mean a lot of AI entities going under, a lot of invested money lost, and a lot of people who suddenly don't have jobs. Almost always there are a few players in these bubbly spaces that make it through to the other side. eBay, for instance, survived the dot-com bubble intact, as did Amazon and PayPal and Adobe, among many others. But the grand shakeout, the sifting for those that could survive a mammoth downturn and the destruction of the rest, that is a tough moment for those directly connected to the bubble-popping industry and those adjacent to it. The folks who run the restaurants that feed the employees who are now laid off, the suppliers of the light switches that go in all the data centers, things like that. There are ripple effects to this sort of bubble pop moment then, and those such sifting might be long-term beneficial, as some have claimed, because it maybe weeds out some of the dead weight and makes things more efficient and profitable in that space 5 or 10 years in the future. That will not help the folks who lose a lot of money when the industry sinks, including those who have their money at banks that made bad bets on these companies or insurance companies that did the same with their customers' resources, which is increasingly common. Everything's great for everyone when these sorts of high-risk, high-reward bets are paying out. But when the golden goose of huge anticipated future profits disappears, that shakeout leaves a lot of entities and people with emptier pockets. None of which suggests any of this is going to happen. There is a chance that we continue to see better and better models using the current generative AI technology, or that some of these companies successfully pivot to another AI approach that bears better next step fruit. And things just keep getting better and more powerful and less expensive for everyone. That could theoretically lead to some pretty cool, broadly beneficial things. This sort of risk is lurking in the background of everything that's happening, though. And while upbeat marketing messages and predictions about how cool it will all be when the next step tools arrive can keep things going for a while, even lacking major milestones that can be pointed at to justify those claims, at some point we will probably need to see something really truly different and novel, where the bottom could fall out, leaving those who were more careful tiptoeing into this collection of technologies looking less like they are being left behind and more like they took smart precautions and made safe, reliable investments during a period of enthusiasm and frenzy. The book I'd like to recommend today is called The Art of Gathering: How We Meet and Why It Matters by Priya Parker. This book gets in deep about why we gather, but also importantly, this is why I picked it up, how to put together gatherings that serve the people who attend them and the people or person who run them. The idea is that it is possible to make any kind of get-together, anything that has multiple people involved, to make these sorts of events, really valuable things in people's lives, where there's connection and sharing, and everybody learns something and walks away smiling. But it's also possible to hold exactly the same type of event with exactly the same content and people, and have it be a very dry, valueless responsibility. The author of this book really knows what she's talking about. She has a lot of credibility and has run a lot of events. She worked as a strategic facilitator, I think, with some of the biggest and flashiest entities, but also some really cool and interesting companies in the past, doing exactly this sort of thing, helping them put together better gatherings. And if you're somebody who likes to attend meetups and parties and things like that, or somebody who wants to put together your own dinner party or meetup, your own social group, or even help meetings at work be more effective and things that people enjoy and value more, this might be a book that is worth your while. Now, if any of that sounds interesting to you, consider picking up a copy of The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. Let's Know Things is a listener-supported show. I don't make any money from ads, only what listeners contribute by becoming paid supporters at letsknowthings.com. If you're not in the position to become a paid supporter at the moment, consider leaving a quick review wherever you get your pods. Those help get the show in front of more people and lend a hint of credibility to independently made shows like this one. A huge thanks in advance, whatever shape your support might take.